Welcome to the Sharp Angles Betting and DFS Show. My name is Tod Burros, and as always, I am the host of this particular podcast, and I am joined, as always, except for 1 week so far, by my partner, Ryan McCrystal. Ryan has been absolutely crushing college football. We don't normally talk about that here, but you should be following him on Twitter at Ryan_McCrystal, as he has been dominating. And this week we will be going over his NFL picks, as well as some DFS thoughts that I might have early in the week. But first, I want to say our annual free week has wrapped up, and we hope you didn't miss out. During this free week promotion, since the start of November, our computer totals went 7-2, a 78% success rate. And our elevated plays went 13-5, 72%, and overall 31-23. For the season, $100 better on our standard unit size release is up $3,558. We want to make sure everyone who got the free week stays on board, so we're breaking out an enormous discount for a limited time. You can use the code TAKE60 to get an astonishing 60% off our NFL Plus package now to get our NFL sides and totals, player props, and fantasy content. It's not too good to be true, but it will end soon. Also, if you could please subscribe and give the thumbs up on our YouTube channel and do the same wherever you listen to podcasts, we would greatly appreciate it. And now, it is my great pleasure to bring in Ryan McCrystal. Ryan, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. Excited that we've actually got a decent Thursday night game to talk about, and actually the first of a couple of good primetime games.
How did that happen?
You got me, Todd?
And I'm not muted.
Seems like maybe Todd lost me.
Ryan.
So I know that the next question Todd is going to ask me is...
All right, we hear you. I'm jumping out and jumping back in.
I'm going to continue on. I know the next question Todd was going to ask me was how we did last week. And I wish I could say that my NFL props were doing as well as my college props, because we've been on fire on the college side. But NFL props, we went 1-3 last week. Unfortunately, there was no action on the Deshaun Watson prop because that line ended up coming in lower than we were expecting on his longest completion. We wanted to be on the under, although if you went ahead and played it anyway, you got a winner because the Ravens defense shut down the Browns' deep passing game, at least, even though the Browns offense exceeded expectations overall. On the season, we're still doing okay, though. 25-23 overall. We're 7-4 on our Thursday night picks. So we're still doing all right in the big picture, even though we've been at a slump this season. Although that's, in my experience, betting props is not uncommon. I feel like I often jump out to a hot start, then we hit a lull sort of mid-season as, the lines catch up to some of the early stuff that we jumped on and gained an edge. And then as we get later in the season, what I often like to try to do is look at where we have some injuries pop up or quarterback changes or whatnot, because that sort of gives us a new opportunity to get it ahead of the curve. Obviously, we did that a little bit earlier in the season. If you were with us when we went over a bunch of Josh Downs props, the quarterback change there benefited Downs. We were early on that one, so we were able to play that a few weeks. And that actually plays back into one of the props that we are going to continue with this week that I'll get into a little bit later. While we wait for Todd to rejoin us, I guess I'll jump into some of the Thursday night talk. Obviously, we've got Bengals at Ravens. Ravens favored by 3.5, total set to 45.5 in this game. I do have one prop that I like in this game. It's not one of my official plays for the week, but if you're looking for some action on this Thursday night, I'm going to play the over on Tanner Hudson's receptions. It's available at 2.5 receptions. I think this is a good matchup for him. Obviously, it's a little bit risky to play someone who's sort of come out of nowhere to take on a role in the Bengals offense, but he's got 10 receptions on 12 targets over the last 2 weeks. So they're definitely incorporating him into the offense. And, maybe some injuries have played a factor in that, but it's not like they're completely decimated. They've still got a bunch of other options. Obviously, Tyler Boyd had a nice game last week and Chase is still there. They've got options. So assuming he continues to still be out there, Todd's back with us now. How you doing, Tod?
I'm good. I'm good. So you were describing your Tanner Hudson
Yes,
play?
I jumped into some Thursday night talk and started out with my Tanner Hudson play. I'm on the over on his receptions at 2.5. And this is really a matchup-based projection. Obviously, we've seen him involved in the offense in a number of ways the past 2 weeks or so. And the Ravens are one of these defenses that we like when we're going to play tight end, the overs on tight ends props. They play a lot of too high safety formations, over 50% of their snaps outside the red zone, seventh highest rate in the league. Actually jumps to 58% when they're playing with a second half lead, which certainly has the potential to be the case this week as they're favored by a little over a field goal in this matchup. Those coverages, they open up the middle of the field. It's obviously a good opportunity for a lot of tight ends, and it seems to be the case for the Bengals and Tanner Hudson, even though we're dealing with sort of a small sample size with him. In the 4 games that he's been active this season, he's seen a 16% target share with 2 high coverage, only 8% with single highs. But he falls into this very common trend of tight ends being used in the middle of the field against 2 high coverages. And given the rate that the Ravens play it and this line only being down pretty low at 2.5 receptions, this looks like a really good option for us tonight.
Yeah, I like it. Last week I lost as I only got 2 receptions instead of 2.5 for Chuba Hubbard. But I've got a double. I'm going back to the double this week. And I think I'm going over on Keaton Mitchell for both 36.5 rushing yards and 8.5 receiving yards. My thought is this. The guy has looked tremendously explosive, and they limited him a little bit the last week despite it. But this is a really big game after they lost that game last week. And I just think this is the week we're going to see a lot more Keaton Mitchell. Your thoughts on my props this week, Ryan?
It's certainly plausible. I would definitely lean over with both of those props that you mentioned. I liked Mitchell coming out of the draft. He was my 13th ranked running back last year. Gave him a draftable grade. Obviously, he went undrafted. And I think the reason why that happened and also why he did see more action last week was he is completely an all or nothing runner. 21% of his carries last year at East Carolina were for 0 or negative yards. That ranked 125th in college football. So yeah, he's explosive, and he's definitely the type of playmaker that you want to create opportunities if you think you've got a way to get him to the outside in the run game or get him in space in the passing game. He's the type of player that you want to design some opportunities. My only hesitancy with either of those props is that the volume, it may never be there just because of this fact that he is he's smaller, he doesn't break a ton of tackles, he dances in the backfield. And so he is the type of player who he might just always be that guy who hits some home runs and everybody wants to see more of him, but the coaches know what more means. It means more negative plays also. So especially in this game where the Ravens are favored, it might not be a great game script for him. If they're playing with a lead, I don't think he's going to be involved because you don't want to put a running back out there who's going to get you negative yards once every 3 or 4 carries. That's not a great fit for him. But because he's so explosive, I think I would always lean over with his props when they're relatively low like that.
Yeah, and to be honest, I really struggled to find one that I liked. I looked at all the other guys, and you had taken Tanner Hudson. Not that I'm saying I would have, but I really felt like this was the one where at least I felt comfortable that I could get one of 2, right? An explosive guy like that only needs 1 screen pass to get 8.5 yards. So I agree that there wasn't any that really jumped out at me on underdog this week. But one thing we're talking about this game and just the fact that we actually have a game that we want to watch on a Thursday night, Ryan, is exciting. And that's going to lead us to the point where I put you on the spot and ask you, who do you think is going to win this week?
I'm going to go with the Ravens. I'll say Ravens 27, Bengals 21. I think the Bengals, being a little bit banged up, going up against a really good Ravens defense, I think it's a tough matchup for them.
Yeah, I think that Hendrickson, the defensive player, I didn't see whether he was active, but I mean, he looked really hurt last week. And the Bengals can't spare any defenders being hurt. I'm really torn because I do think this is going to be a good Joe Burrow week, but I'm going to go with you and take the Ravens. And I like the score you went with, 27-24. I will go 30-27 just to be different, but I would not be shocked if you nailed this one. But both of them were pretty much on the overs. All right, so that gets us through the Thursday night section. Again, remember, even though our free week is wrapped up and we hope you didn't miss out, get the 60% off. We had amazing results on the free weeks, and we want you guys who took advantage of the free weeks to make more money with us. Use the code TAKE60 to get an astonishing 60% off our NFL Plus package and anything that's on our website. All right, let's move over to Ryan, your other props, the one for Sunday. We're going to start with the Steelers. And I wonder if you have Pickens a winner.
Hope so. George Pickens, I'm going to be on the over on his receiving yards, and this is going to be my favorite prop of the week. I was not expecting it to be my number one prop of the week, but then just shortly before we came on here, I looked up the odds, and they had posted the lines for this game, and this is available at 36.5 yards. I was willing to play this up to 53.5, and it came in almost 20 yards below what I was willing to play it to. This is my third year doing these props articles and podcasts, and I've never been that far off. Usually when I set a line of what I'm willing to take, I end up being within five yards or so on one of these yardage props, maybe up to 7 or 10 every so often, but this is crazy. I'm really shocked by it. His previous low on this prop for the season was 42.5. That was in weeks 1 and 2. Week 2 being the last Browns game. And it makes sense that the number would be a little bit lower against the Browns, given how good their defense has played. But this number was at 53.5 just 2 weeks ago. So to drop that much is shocking. Now, the reason why I still like it, even though obviously this is one of, if not the best defense in the league this year, it's all about the Browns' coverage tendencies. They play man coverage at the highest rate in the league, 45%. League average is only 24%. So every week I always look up whoever's playing the Browns. How does that change how they spread the ball around? Because it gives us an opportunity to gain an edge here. If there's a big discrepancy between how they're spreading the ball around in their offense, man coverage versus zone coverage, because almost every week you're getting a zone heavy defense, and the Browns are really one of the few outliers here. And the Steelers are a great one for this because Pickens' target share 35% versus man coverage, 20% versus zone. So he sees a significant boost against a team like the Browns. And sure enough, in their first meeting, when I said that line was his previous low of the season, he had 127 yards on 10 targets. So they went after him in that game. They want to get him the ball in one-on-one situations. That's his role in the offense. Now, you would be correct to point out that Deontay Johnson didn't play in that game, and it's fair to wonder if that has an effect. But looking at when both Pickens and Johnson are on the field at the same time this season against man coverage, Pickens' target share is 38%. So actually an even higher target share. That's probably, the fact that it's higher is probably a little bit of a small sample size fluke. But point being, they love Pickens in man coverage situations. They want to get him the ball in those spots, and he's going to see a lot of it against the Browns. So with this line being so low, I mean, it's so low that could be 2 receptions. They could easily hit him for a 20-yard reception and a 17-yard reception, and there he's over just like that, because they're going to give him one-on-one opportunities down the field. So love this prop this week.
Yeah, and another thing to mull, and I agree with you, it's a great prop, but Pat Freiermuth looks like he might return this week. I don't know that that's a negative for George Pickens, though. Having someone that they actually have to worry about at the tight end spot might even open up that, those longer plays to Pickens even more. Let's move on to your next one. We'll take a Hopkins skip and a jump over to DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, DeAndre Hopkins' longest reception, over 21.5 yards. This is another one. The line came in a little lower than I was expecting. I was willing to play this up to 24 yards, but it's down at 21.5, probably because we played this last week and lost. But I'm going to trust the process here, because if you remember last week, we played this because of the rate that Will Levis is throwing downfield. He's thrown at least 15 yards downfield on 35% of attempts this season. The next highest is Deshaun Watson at 25%. So a 10 percentage point increase over the next most aggressive passer. And that, even though we lost this prop last week, in fact, I think all of the Titans receivers lost their longest reception prop last week, which is surprising given the rate that they're throwing downfield. But looking at the big picture and the rate that Will Levis was giving them opportunities down the field, he fully met our expectations. Last week, last week we had, sorry, I just lost it in my notes for a second. Last week, 36% of his throws were 15 or more yards downfield. As I mentioned, 35% is his season average. So right in line with what we were expecting from him. And then 28% of his throws last week were 20 or more yards downfield. That was a season high. So he was continuing to be aggressive just as we expected, just didn't complete those passes this week. But if this rate of downfield usage continues for Hopkins and for the other Titans receivers, they're going to hit the overs on these longest reception props pretty consistently. Like I said, this is available at 21.5 yards. With it, if Levis is throwing 20 or more yards downfield on 1 out of every 4 passes like last week, it's only going to be one catch, and it could happen multiple times throughout the games because he's getting so many opportunities. So don't love this as much as the Pickens prop, just because that Pickens prop is so ridiculous, so much lower than I expected. But this is a great opportunity, and against the Jaguars defense, I should mention too, that's good, but certainly not near the top of the league in defending downfield. I think I lost Tod again.
Nope, I'm there. Right. I muted myself that time. All right, so we are going to go to Houston for not one, but the next 2 props, Ryan. And we'll start with a guy who seemingly has turned into a different human being in Noah Brown. Scott Barrett, shout out to Scott. He was really pushing him in DFS the last 2 weeks, and I played a good bit of him. It really has been remarkable what Noah Brown has done.
Yeah, it's been fun to see him break out. Noah Brown has been one of these guys all the way back to his college career at Ohio State who's just always been injured, but has always clearly had the talent. And it's fun to see him get an opportunity to play more of a featured role in an offense finally, really since his last season in college at Ohio State when he stayed relatively healthy and had a nice final season there. But for his prop this week, I'm going to be on the over on his longest reception against the Cardinals. There's no line yet because, unfortunately, as has been the case throughout his career, he's banged up again and has not practiced this week. So obviously we'll have to keep an eye on his status. But if he goes, even if he's a little bit less than 100%, if they deem him healthy enough to play, I'd still like this prop. I'd be willing to play it up to 24.5 yards. Probably comes in a little bit lower than that. It was at just 18.5 last week. So if he plays, I like this prop because of the fact that he's playing the Cardinals. And this will be the 3rd week in a row that we're targeting a longest reception prop against Arizona. We won 2 weeks ago with Amari Cooper, last week with Kyle Pitts. And it just comes down to the fact that they cannot defend downfield. Arizona's allowing a 60% completion rate at 15 or more yards downfield. That's embarrassing. So it's a situation where we want to, if we can identify someone that we're confident is going to get downfield opportunities against them, we want to be playing the longest reception. And Brown looks like the best option, assuming he's healthy. Now, obviously, Nico Collins was also injured last week, so that was a factor. But dating back to when Brown returned from his injury in week 6, he's had 10 of the Texans' 21 receptions at 15 or more yards downfield. And even if we ignore last week and look back to when he and Collins were both healthy, Brown has had 7 downfield targets compared to Collins' 5. So he was still getting downfield opportunities even when Collins was out there and healthy. Now, as I mentioned, he hasn't practiced this week, so we could certainly find ourselves in a situation where he just doesn't suit up on Sunday. If that happens, I might just choose to stay away because Collins is also banged up, obviously. I believe he said he was going to play, although he was a limited participant in practice on Thursday. Without really knowing what percentage health he is at, maybe I would stay away. However, I will say if both of them are out, if both Browns and Collins end up not playing, then it becomes obvious. Tank Dell is then the number 1 downfield weapon for them. in that situation. So if we're without both Collins and Brown, I would absolutely play the over on Dell's longest reception.
Yep, and tying into that is the next one, which is Dalton Schultz over on receptions, with both of the other guys possibly banged up, even if they come back. I'm guessing that's a big part of why you like Dalton Schultz this week.
Actually, it's not, although it certainly doesn't hurt if the other guys are banged up. Although we should also mention that Dalton Schultz has been limited in practice. He was limited on both Wednesday and Thursday in practice with the hamstring issue. Although the fact that he is limited and not out makes me think he will probably suit up. And if he does, I'll take the over on his receptions, which is available at 4.5 against Arizona. The reason I like this, it's not because there's potentially some banged up weapons at the receiver, but it's Arizona's coverage scheme. And it's a way that we attack props a lot with these teams that play too high coverages. Arizona leads the league in their rate of too high coverage at 59% outside the red zone. Great opportunity for a lot of tight ends, and Schultz included. He leads the Texans with a 22% target share against too high coverage. And even if we look at just the games where both Collins and Brown have been healthy, because obviously they both missed some time this season, but when Schultz, Collins, and Brown are all on the field together, it's the exact same outcome, 22% target share for Schultz against too high coverage. So regardless of who's out there at receiver, I like this for Schultz as long as he is able to get healthy by Sunday.
Awesome. Great stuff. We'll get into the Texans more in the DFS section. And let's finish up with another returning champion, if my memory is correct, Javonte Williams receiving yards under.
Yeah, this one is available at 16.5 yards, which is another friendly line relative to what I was willing to play. I was willing to go as low as 13.5. This is another matchup-based prop. They're going up against the Vikings on Sunday Night Football. The receiving yards under for starting running backs against Minnesota is 8-2 on the year. The two guys to hit their over were Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. So two of the most explosive weapons in the passing game out of the backfield are the only guys who hit the under. Obviously, Javonte Williams, although not a bad receiver, certainly doesn't fall into that category. And the reason why this prop is so successful, it's something that we've talked about a few times throughout the season, is the Vikings blitz at the highest rate in the league, 49% blitz rate. Blitzes limit the running back target share pretty much for every team across the league. It actually has a little bit less of an effect for the Broncos. It's a 30% target. Looking at all of their running backs, it's a 30% target share on non-blitzes, 26% on blitzes. So the running backs are still involved to an extent, but Williams isn't even the primary, their primary running back in the passing game that they've used this year. Samaje Perine is that guy. And it has a lot to do with the fact that Perine he's more trusted in pass protection. And so part of my thinking here is if you have one running back that you trust a lot more in pass protection and another guy that you tend to take off the field in obvious passing situations, if you're going up against a team that's blitzing 49% of the time, he's probably going to get more action even in the non-obvious passing situations, just because you're always going to have to be prepared for the blitz. In fact, the Vikings situation in which they blitz the most is on first down. They have a 67% blitz rate on first down. League average is 27%. So you've really got to adjust how you're planning. If you want to throw the ball on first down, you got to be prepared for the blitz. And so I think that could put us in a situation here where we're seeing a lot more of Samaje Perine in this game, because he's the guy that they trust to stay back there in pass protection. Looking at, to sort of demonstrate the fact that they trust him in those situations, I looked up who do they use on 3rd and 5 or more yards, third and long, 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, fairly obvious passing situation. Perine has played 66% of those snaps this year, whereas Williams has played only 7% of those snaps. So it's pretty obvious who they trust in those situations. And given how the Vikings blitz, especially on first down, I think we could see this backfield share split up a little bit differently because this is such a unique matchup. And that just could add to our confidence in playing the under here.
Yep, I think so. And I'm going to just mention one more time. I know I normally only mention it twice during a show, that if you had the free week last week and you won money with us, come on back and take 60 for an astonishing 60% off. I won't go through all of it, but guys, I mean, this is the opportunity to really, get in there and double up. You won money with us last week. Take that for a free roll this week at 60% off. And good luck to everyone who plays. All right, that's going to do that for the ad reads for the show, Ryan. But I really enjoyed your props this week.
Thank you. Well, that does it for my props. So let's dive into your portion of the podcast, get into some DFS talk. First with quarterbacks, obviously. We've got a couple guys on reasonable salaries already emerging as chalk. It's Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy. So let's start our conversation there. What are your early thoughts on this situation? Good chalk or bad chalk?
I mean, I'm going to lean Kyler as bad chalk, right? We saw him run the ball a couple times, once for a touchdown. He even said it was the easiest read he's had in 2 years. I don't expect the Texans to be that friendly. And, the weapons are all, there's two things that go to chalk. Quarterback chalk isn't that bad. Kyler at 15%, 14%. Would I play some? Yeah. But then you look at all his weapons also being chalk on a team that just hasn't been that good on offense, doesn't have a great offensive line. There's a very good chance this game is going to play fast. But I find it very hard to play a guy like Kyler and his weapons both into ownership. As far as Purdy, again, it's hard to really pick a guy to be overweight on. And that's what we're talking about here. If you want to go even weight or half weight on either of these guys, that's a very reasonable thing. But if you're going to be over, you probably want to be over by 2x. So to give 25-30% of your allocation for the week on a guy who's second week back with weapons that are also chalky, and a guy who doesn't have a running floor, it doesn't seem great to me. So I immediately look at CJ Stroud, because a lot of times if a game is getting a lot of action, the other quarterback isn't getting a lot of action, and Stroud isn't. But he's up to 7,000. And as you mentioned, a bunch of his weapons are more expensive and they're injured. So, I mean, right now I'm leaning toward the under with both of those guys. And I'm not looking to Stroud necessarily. And, it might bite me like it bit me last week not playing Stroud. But, the Cardinals are a bad defense. And the games where Stroud has really done well is when they're forced to play from behind a bit. So I'm not really looking there. A couple guys that are kind of interesting early. Jordan Love is interesting at 5,604% ownership. They're playing a team that's going to speed them up. Well, whether it'll be enough, who knows? But he's interesting at least early. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, he's doesn't have a lot of ownership yet. I think that'll change. At 4,600, I think he's going to be the cash game QB for a lot of people, and that will bring along some ownership. But you have to consider a guy that cheap if he's not going to have ownership. My two favorite early plays are Dak and Tua, who both have under 5% ownership, and they're high end. So that also gives you a little bit different of a build. I think the Dolphins, with Achane coming back and off of two lackluster offensive weeks, I think they're going to put up a crooked number on the Raiders. I think the Raiders, Pierce, great story, is just going to come back to reality. And I would not be shocked if we look up at halftime and the Dolphins have 35 points. So I like Tua. And again, Dak is really on a roll. They're playing the Buccaneers, and, they're a pass funnel. Right now, I like Dak. Your thoughts on those thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, definitely agree with your logic on Tua for one. The Raiders are they're due to fall back a little bit after a hot start after the coaching change. And especially with this game being in Miami, I could certainly see this being the game where they kind of fall back down to earth a little bit and get lit up in that one. The one that seems to me is a fairly obvious one, especially if you're looking to save some money at the quarterback position, is Thompson Robinson. That, like you mentioned, with especially if the low roster share sticks. If he's low salary and low roster share, it makes a ton of sense. A lot of people are going to want to avoid that game mostly, given the low total. I believe it was set to like 37.5 last I saw, maybe 36.5. But you got a running back, or you got a receiver, or you got a quarterback who has fantastic rushing ability. Last year, if you remove sacks from his rushing totals, which are obviously a part of rushing in the college game, not the NFL, remove sacks, and he had 7 games with over 60 rushing yards last year. So it certainly has the potential to put up a decent game, even in a low scoring game. If he puts up some decent rushing yards and gets one of those in for a touchdown, he's going to put up some pretty good fantasy numbers on a really low salary. So if you're looking to save money at the position, that seems like a really obvious one to go with.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's jump over to running backs now. Devin Singletary is emerging as the chalkiest of chalk this week. And, for me, I think as I mentioned on the pod last week, despite last week's performance, Singletary will almost always look like bad chalk to me. But what are your early thoughts on Singletary and the early running back slate here?
I mean, last week I raised my Singletary last minute, not enough. But I thought it was a really good week and he was cheaper. So, and much less I expected. I just didn't hear a lot of talk about him. So I thought I would get the ownership that I did, right around 10%. And with a salary in the 4,000s in a good matchup after he had failed people the week before, I came around on him as the week came on. But if he's going to be 30% owned and he's up to 5,300, you're going to I know Arizona's not a great defense, but I just find that one really tough to swallow. Travis Etienne is the other running back over 20%. We saw how easy it is for him to disappear in certain game scripts. Couple guys that I do have interest in for over positions right now. Josh Jacobs is down to 6,800. His ownership is half of what it was the last 2 weeks. And I think they're going to be behind, but they're not going to take Josh Jacobs out of the game. I think AOC had shown in his first start a lot of willingness to drop it off to Jacobs. I think he's interesting. He's also about 500 less than what he was last week. Raheem Mostert has certainly slowed down, and 6,900 is no joke, but I'm seeing 1% ownership. And I don't know if that holds. And I know people are going to want to play Achane at 6,600. But at any time, I can get Mostert at 1%, and I can go 10 to 15% and be way over the field. To me, that's a no-brainer. He's shown explosive upside. And that's where recency bias can really stick. I haven't heard anything about the left tackle coming back. The guy who used to be with the Saints, Armstead. But especially if he's back, I am going to be all over Mostert at that ownership. I always get Rachaad White wrong. I didn't play him in best ball. I was right that he's not a good running back. I was wrong because it doesn't matter when you're getting that many passes. He's another guy who'd been 20% owned, and right now we're showing a 5% ownership at 6K. I'll definitely be over if that sticks. And David Montgomery is my last one. We already heard Jahmyr Gibbs say that Monty should have gotten the touchdown last week, and it was his first game back from the injury. I wouldn't be surprised to see his role increase again, and his salary is down 1% ownership. I mean, again, give me talented guys on a good offense whose ownership is down for some reason that could change. Give me that kind of player like Mostert and Montgomery, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on Mostert. And with a low, anytime Mostert is going to have a low roster share, you should have him rostered at a really high rate, because this is an offense that's capable of just putting up huge numbers in any given week, right? And if you have the opportunity to be ahead of the curve on that, almost regardless of the salary, you should take advantage of that low roster share, because he could at any point in time have a 3-touchdown game, given how they're capable of putting up points, especially when they're playing not a great defense in the Raiders this week. So that absolutely makes sense with that roster share down as low as it is. The one that I would slightly disagree with you on, or at least caution on, is Montgomery, because since they've got the Thanksgiving game coming up, and he's been banged up, I kind of wonder if they would take advantage of any opportunity they get to lighten his workload again this week. If they build a lead, I wonder if they lessen his reps in the second half of the game just to kind of keep him fresh going into Thanksgiving.
Awesome.
All right. So speaking of Mostert and the Dolphins, let's jump over to the wide receivers, and some of their usual suspects are chalky plays at this position. So what are some of your early thoughts on the receivers this week?
Right now, Tyreek is 9,300 and the highest owned wide receiver, but low 20s. To me, that's good chalk, right? If I'm willing to go 50, 60% on a guy like that if I get late in the week and it makes sense. I just think the Dolphins are going to really, really be interested in turning around the dynamic from the last couple weeks. Jalen Waddle's salary refuses to drop, even though he hasn't done all that much. 7,600, and that's bad, but that keeps his ownership down, so that keeps him in play for me. The other guys who are chalk, as I mentioned, are Hollywood and Michael Wilson. And, frankly, those are guys I'm just not willing to play into 20% ownership. And I don't think the Texans' D has been all that bad. That's scary. Keenan Allen's banged up. Mike Williams is gone. Palmer is gone. I think if Keenan Allen's ruled out, it's going to make Quentin Johnston really popular. And I think I would be interested in him up to about, I'll pull one from your props, up to about 15% ownership. I wouldn't mind being over on Quentin Johnston. But the guy I'm really interested in, and I think we talked about him last week, Ryan, is Jalen Guyton. Guy has shown a lot of skill. And if Keenan Allen's out, I mean, right now Guyton has no ownership. I mean, even if Keenan plays but is banged up, I like this matchup. I didn't mention Justin Herbert in the quarterback section, but I think he's very viable. I really like Jalen Guyton.
Yeah, that makes sense. He is a decent downfield weapon in their offense. I will say, though, I've been pretty down on Quentin Johnson, even going back to before the season. We talked about him on those podcasts that I was on. One of my strongest unders on season-long props was the under on his receiving yards, which is looking pretty good so far, as long as we don't have a late season breakout. But the one caveat I had to that was, if Keenan Allen goes down, that's the role for him, because he's not a downfield weapon. He's not a good replacement for Mike Williams, because he just doesn't have, despite the fact that he physically looks like a downfield receiver, that's not his skill set. He doesn't have the route running ability. He doesn't have reliable hands downfield. He's never been that type of guy, but he is dangerous after the catch. And that's a lot of what Keenan Allen does. So if Allen were out, this is a good spot for him. So I just wanted to mention that despite the fact that I've been down on him throughout the year, this could be an opportunity where he does have a bit of a breakout game, because it's the role that's right for him.
And if you watch the games, he does get open on slants. Mm-hmm. And, he's and this is what I said about him in our draft, best ball podcast. I didn't draft a lot of them in best ball. But I said, he is a big guy who plays like a small guy. And, yep. He's quick twitch. He has pretty good moves to get off the line. I agree with your sentiment on him, and that's why I'm willing to play him as an over up to about 15%.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just one other thing I wanted to mention on the wide receivers with CeeDee Lamb. I know he's going to be popular this week. You mentioned how
I forgot him. He was on my list.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that you like Dak too, so obviously it makes sense that you would like Lamb as well. This is another situation, like I mentioned with Montgomery, leading into a short week. The lowest snap count he played last year was the week before Thanksgiving. Now, it was a blowout, but this week also has the potential to be a blowout. So I think it's another situation of, if they have the opportunity to lighten his workload this week, they'll take advantage of it. So that's something to keep an eye on with those guys. Since we've got multiple a bunch of teams heading into short weeks this week. It's something to be on the lookout a little bit more than usual. Now let's move over to the tight ends. What are your early thoughts here?
Well, just go back to CeeDee Lamb. I think he's an interesting pivot from Tyreek. I don't think most people are going to put the logic to it that you just did. I'll throw out that people are just not used to paying $9,200 for CeeDee Lamb, right? They just don't consider him that top guy. And it's a funny thing. A guy could be 8,900 one week, and people are like, "Oh, no problem." 8,800, no problem. 9,200, I'm not paying 9,200 for CeeDee Lamb. So I like him if I'm in Dak's stacks. I think that if Dak's needed to go over, CD will also be needed to go over. I don't know that I like CD that much away from Dak's stacks this week. As far as tight ends, right now, again, this is why I always caution that things can change. Last week, we had a couple tight ends at 30% projection early, and I think Ingram came in at 10%. But McBride and Ingram are both super chalky. McBride's also up to 4,400. Now, Tyler really threw him the ball, but it was a very good matchup last week. 30% at 4,400. I just don't see the upside as much as I did last week. Sam Laporta has been a good bit slower lately, but right now we're seeing him at under 10% at 5,800 on a week where we don't have any elite tight ends. I think he could get steamed up a little bit, but you got to keep him in mind if he's over. If not. On the low end, I mentioned Pat Freiermuth coming back. He's $2,700. I mean, Pat Freiermuth was a $4,400 tight end last year. I will be over at 2,700 as long as he doesn't go nuts. And another low-priced $2,700 guy that I have interest in is Michael Mayer. Guy's got talent. He wasn't my favorite tight end coming out, but 2,700 in a game where they're going to be playing from behind. If ownership rate is like 2% where it is now, I could see myself playing some Michael Mayer.
Yeah, from those tight ends, I don't really have. It's so hard to find someone that you love at tight end throughout most.
There wasn't anyone.
I mean,
but Freiermuth at 2,700.
Well, and that's actually going to be the one that I'm going to say I disagree with you on, because I think this is a tough matchup for him against the Browns defense. Obviously, I mentioned when talking about Pickens, how they play a lot of man coverage, and that's not a great matchup for a lot of tight ends, Freiermuth included. Obviously, he's been out for a good chunk this season. So just looking at Steelers tight ends overall, they have a 10% target share against man coverage, 18% against zone. Freiermuth had one catch for 2 yards against Cleveland earlier this year. It's not a great matchup for him. And then also you look at this game expected to be such low scoring. I think earlier I mentioned 36. I looked it up. It's actually, the total is up to 32.5 in this game. So given that he's not going to see a huge target share, most likely, given the Browns coverage, you're purely chasing tight ends, and you're purely chasing touchdowns and doing it in what's expected to be the lowest scoring game of the week. So that seems like a spot where you'd probably want to avoid him.
I mean, that is why I do more research later, or I just listen to you and get your points on these types of things. That is going to do it for this another week. And next week, we're going to be doing something a little differently with the Thanksgiving games. Ryan, myself, and what's the other gentleman's name, Ryan?
Adam Wild.
We'll be doing a Tuesday podcast. And what we're going to do is we're going to go game by game, get Ryan's props, and then Adam and I will talk DFS about those games. So no Thursday pod next week. We will be on Tuesday. We look forward to it. We thank you for your support. We did have one question from Nathan H. B. Hall or Mixon in standard. I'm going to say Brees Hall.
Without doing a deep dive on the numbers, I would lean the same way just because I'd rather go up against the Bills defense than the Ravens.
Yeah, and standard, of course, touchdowns matter, and I think Mixon has a little bit more touchdown equity, but Breece Hall could break a 70-yarder at any point. I don't love either of them. I go 60-40 Breece Hall. So that's going to do it for this week's show. Enjoy the great game this week. Hopefully it keeps us tantalized. And Ryan and I will be back with Adam Wild next Tuesday, and we hope you will join us. Thank you so much, everyone.